how then do we go from that Jewish understanding of festivals to the Christian understanding of the church year? Well, you need to see that the church year is based on that same Jewish principle of the cycle of seasons. The same principle of the cycle of the different festivals was adopted by the Christian church. And even though we've changed some of the particular cycle, even though we've changed some of what festivals we celebrate and which ones we don't, and in fact even changed the dates of when we celebrate them, basically the same cycle is maintained, both within the church as a whole and within the church service as its own particular point of time. And so again, we can start as we did before. We start with autumn. Autumn. And so in the autumn, we have the particular concepts for us. Now, one thing that you need to understand is that so much of the church year doesn't work for us in the southern hemisphere. That if you're watching this in the southern hemisphere, you immediately start saying, wait a second, we don't celebrate that in the southern hemisphere. We don't celebrate it then. And that's exactly right. Is that for us, we don't celebrate those things that way. In fact, it's all topsy-turvy. In fact, for us, autumn is actually spring. And so you need to realize that so much of the church year is based on a northern hemisphere time space, not so much a southern one. Which is why even at Christmas time we sing songs about sleigh bells and snow, when of course here in Australia there's very little snow or sleigh bells available during that period of the time. And so we need to always be aware that so much of what we understand and the connotations of that time of the year, we need to adapt them for the fact that we're in the southern hemisphere and would be in a different season. In fact, the opposite season to what it is. So where does the Christian calendar begin? Well, it begins late autumn. At the end of autumn, which is really at the end of November, is really the beginning of the season for us. And the first season, therefore, begins between autumn and winter. And that season is called Advent. The Advent season. And so Advent usually begins at the end of November, at the beginning of December. And that's the beginning of the church year for the Christian church. So again, the harvest has come in, the harvest is in, the harvest has done its thing, and now we're looking forward to winter. We're looking forward to the end of everything. Everything's going to be it's closing down, everything is dying down, and we're going to be waiting out for the next few months the rigors of winter. And so that begins with Advent. Of course, the word Advent means coming, the coming of something, and usually the coming of something special. And of course, the coming that we're talking about is Jesus, and the celebration of that particularly in Christmas Day. And so the period that we have between Advent and Christmas is, of course, called that period when we're preparing ourselves for Jesus' coming and for the connections with that. Of course, the next period is Christmas. Okay, Christmas. And Christmas is an interesting one because it falls on the 25th of December. And the 25th of December used to be a very important day. In the time when Christmas was first set, the 25th of December was in fact the shortest day and the longest night. In fact, what we would understand is that it was the midpoint of winter, the midpoint of winter. Of course, today, now that we've moved the calendar now tells us that in fact the midpoint of winter is the 21st of December. But that's just how things have moved across. Even though the midpoint moved, they kept the 25th. So why the 25th? Well, it was, in a sense, therefore, the shortest day, and so therefore the height of death. I think it's quite funny and ironic that the Christian church then chose that day to celebrate the birth of Jesus. Because, in fact, instead of being a day when everybody else was talking about death, the Christians could talk about new life and the celebration of this new child, the born in Bethlehem to Joseph and to Mary. And it's that celebration then of new life that it really is the hallmark of what Christmas is about and about that Christmas season. And so after the Christmas season, as we begin to look forward to spring, as we move forward to that, comes the next period, which is called Epiphany. Epiphany is means when God became present with us. And it's usually the time when we talk about things like the baptism of Jesus, when God was particularly present, that God said, "This is my son, listen to him." When it came down, also the wise men fit within that period of Epiphany. And so Epiphany then begins or ends winter. So winter is finishing. And you can see that there's a connection there between saying God is with us and then the end of death and the looking forward to, the hoping for new life. And that's what happens in January as we move then into February and the process of what process would be the end of winter and the beginning of spring. And it's in spring that we have the next big movement of Christianity. And of course, in spring, as in the Jewish system we had Passover, in the Christian one, what we have is Easter. Now, of course, Easter, the word Easter potentially comes from a pagan feast called Estre, and that feast was all about fertility. And so, of course, you can imagine it's about rabbits and eggs and those kinds of things, which are symbols of fertility, which maybe seep their way into Christianity. But that doesn't matter. We can always, retranslate pagan symbols into Christian ones, which in fact is exactly what we can do. Because what Easter is about is really the high point of the Christian calendar. It's the point where we come to acknowledge what Jesus came to do, that Jesus dies. And so Easter really begins at Palm Sunday. So Palm Sunday being the Sunday when we remember Jesus going in triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And from that into the next weekend. And that weekend, which begins on Thursday night with the handing over of Jesus to be crucified, and then out into being crucified itself on the Friday and rising up again on the Sunday. And so we see that's Easter and the celebration of life, the new life that comes through Christ, the new life that Christ offers, and the salvation that comes through knowing Him and through believing in Him is the concepts of Easter. After Easter, the next big celebration, which is the one that moves us towards summer and that sets us up for summer, is called Pentecost. Now, of course, Pentecost isn't a Christian feast. It was originally a Jewish one. But for Christians, we connect Pentecost with the giving of the Holy Spirit. And of course, that connection isn't by accident. It needs to be there because it needs to be for us all the way through the process of summer and into autumn. It's this period here, which sometimes is called the proper period, or sometimes even called ordinary, is where the Holy Spirit then begins to work in us, to grow us and to develop us so that we can again go through harvest. And in the harvest, go back into Advent and then do that cycle all over again. And so you see how the Advent that goes from Advent to Christmas to Epiphany to Easter to Pentecost to proper and then back again to Advent. And there's the cycle of the Christian life. That's the cycle of the movement of the Christian life. As we celebrate the coming of Jesus, as we remember Jesus being with us and God being with us, through into remembering that Jesus comes to save us and to give us life, through into the Holy Spirit who empowers us to then grow and develop in our faith, and then we go through that cycle again.